This is the Saturday Morning Special from Slasher Sports.
Another Saturday morning special here at Slasher U. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our college football show, our Power Hour here at Slasher U, presented by Slasher Sports. I'm your host, Christian Rao, here with my co-host, Steve Feck, and we are already in Week 11, Steve. Week 11, wild. We have a plenty good Saturday six-pack to give you today with a lot of college football playoff implications and some big bowl games maybe on the line as well.
Well, absolutely. And then for me, I mean, this has been a re-indoctrination to the excitement of an entire college football season. Usually I really only paid attention to the Thanksgiving games and then like Army, Navy, and maybe something in the Ivy. So to be so intimately woven into the season here with this program and the various things we do, it's been rejuvenating. I mean, I feel like I'm only 80 years old rather than the 96 that I am. So
very good to hear. First and foremost, before we get started, I want to thank everyone who has supported us on the YouTube channel. We have surpassed 150 subscribers in just a short amount of period that we've started that page. So thank you so much. We've gone over 30,000 views already. So again, thank you. We are really appreciative. We love the comments and the engagement that we've seen.
Yes.
And that is the biggest part. So please continue to keep it up. Please engage with us. We try to respond to every comment. I think we're doing a pretty good job at doing that, especially in the last few weeks. So thank you once again, good or bad. We love the feedback. We love the debate, the discussion, all that. So once again, thank you. So Steve, I have my coffee. I'm ready to go. It's going to be a fantastic Saturday six-pack. I know that it's going to be a fantastic day of college football. We're seeing snow in the Midwest. I don't know how it looks up in the Northeast. I think we're getting the last warm day down here in Southern Virginia before the cold front hits. So I think we're going to have some interesting weather across the country during college football.
Yeah, it's going to be dropping into the 30s here in Western PA. I think weather could potentially be an issue for the Penn State Maryland game that we're going to talk about, a little bit later on. Only because being up in the mountains, up in the Allegheny Mountains there, you never know how the weather's going to change, but that's what football should be played in the mud, in the snow. All the Southern teams should have to play in the North, have all the Northern schools play in the South, September, October, then the rest of the year you play in the mud and the snow. And that's what makes games extra special.
Yeah, some of my favorite memories of playing football when I was in high school were those snow games, and younger too, not even just high school, but those snow games were the ones that I really were very memorable. And those snow games were no joke. Where I grew up in Western New York, when it snowed, you couldn't see the first down markers. So yeah, definitely some fun there. All right, let's get started with this Saturday six-pack here, and we're going to start off with probably one of the most paid attention to games of the day. I would say that this is probably. You could battle it with one that we talk about later. And this is Alabama and Ole Miss. We got the Nick Saban versus Lane Kiffin game. Lane Kiffin, a former assistant of Nick Saban. Nick Saban is 27-2 against his former assistants. If he wins this one, he will be in second place alone in that kind of record, passing Joe Paterno. If he gets his 28th win, only Bobby Bowden has a higher record for that aspect. We look into this game, Bama could move to their third loss. There is a highly big potential for that to happen in this matchup. Ole Miss has been one of those teams who has seen peaks and valleys this season, but is only just a sly out of the SEC West. I believe that they're not going to be able to make it that far. I don't see that happening. Regardless, Ole Miss and Alabama should be a good matchup here. Alabama's fighting for a top bowl spot in NY6. I have a feeling that they're completely out of the college football playoffs. We have not seen a 2-loss team in the college football playoffs. Ole Miss is only 8-1. So technically they are still alive in my mind. I still think that they are out of the picture, but a win against Alabama might change the committee's mind slightly, Steve.
I mean, it could, but I think that we're starting to firm up. If there's a team that's not technically in that playoff spot now that is going to get there, it's probably going to be Oregon as opposed to Ole Miss.
Yeah.
And it is kind of amazing that the Crimson Tide could be bracing itself for its first 2-game losing streak since I don't know, when Forrest Gump was returning kicks for them, in that movie. But before the Alabama faithful, start the mourning period over the losses to Tennessee and LSU, I encourage a few deep breaths, gain some perspective here. The Crimson Tide didn't lose to LSU. The Tigers simply beat them. It happens to the best of teams. I mean, sometimes your best on any given Friday or Saturday is not better than the other teams. And, as long as a team has a Bryce Young, and as long as Bryce Young is relatively healthy, Alabama's going to stay in any game. And I think they're going to control this game. Ole Miss's defense has been just porous the last 3 weeks. Opposing quarterbacks have thrown for, I believe, at a 70% completion clip, over the last 3 weeks. And last week they had a freshman quarterback for Texas A&M to throw for 338 yards and 4 touchdowns. So I think for Mississippi to stay in this, they have to adopt, the running rebels mantra. They need to just grind out yards on the run. I think they're 3rd in the nation overall in rushing.
Yeah.
And, to a degree, you want to see Alabama have a 2-game losing streak. And then you're faced with a dilemma. Oh, crap. That means Lane Kiffin would have been the one to do it. I mean, there are, you can say what you want about Nick Saban. He's a great football coach.
Oh, for sure.
But Lane Kiffin, it's really hard to root for him. I mean, he's the kind of guy that strikes me that if he was performing CPR, he wouldn't start it until the TV cameras got there, and then he would try to save the patient. Now, that might be a little bit rough, but I think Alabama is going to shake off the loss last week, and I think that they're going to make a statement.
They rebounded great against Mississippi State after their loss to Tennessee, so you would probably make that assumption they could do it again against Ole Miss. I agree with you, though. If Ole Miss is going to stay in this game, they have to get that running game going. They got it going their last game against Texas A&M behind Quinshon Judkins, who is honestly probably one of the best running backs we've seen in the SEC, and he's only a freshman.
Yeah.
And that's really exciting to see. He's over 1,000 yards already. He had 205 yards and a touchdown against Texas A&M. He went for 111 against LSU, 139 against Auburn. That's his last 3 games. So if you can find a way to get over 100 yards, I'd say that's a good spot for him. He's doing a fantastic job. 8 touchdowns in his last 5 games. It's just incredible. So he has 3 of the last 5 games, he's had multi-touchdown days. So I think a lot of it will revolve around him. Obviously, Dart's got to get going as well. But it's just on the other side. Bama has that as well. Bryce Young, obviously, we know all about him. He looked a little shaky last week at the beginning of that game. He's kind of started to figure it out, slow down. And then Gibbs. Gibbs is a fantastic running back as well. So I like Alabama in this game. The spread on this one, though, is -11. If you think that they're going to rebound just like they do at Mississippi State, that should be an easy bet for you to take Bama with the 11 points. However, it's just the fact that we've seen some really close games lately with Alabama. It makes you wonder if they're going to be able to take care of this one. It's in Oxford. Hopefully the fans in Oxford show up and don't just leave at halftime. And when we have the beginning of the game, the third quarter, there's only 25% capacity. I know you guys like the party down there, but you might want to stay and watch this game. This is going to be a really good matchup.
It is. I mean, I would say I'm going to give the points. If I was I'm not going to touch this game because there's so many dynamics that make me a little bit nervous. But if I was going to encourage you to make a bet, I would probably take the points in Ole Miss. I don't know what I even want to do with the over and under in this game. There's a lot of uncertainties that make this a great football game to watch, but maybe less of a fun thing to try to pad your FanDuel or other gambling accounts that you have. I mean, this is going to be, I think until the fourth quarter, I think that it's going to absolutely be up for grabs.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. I think this is a good game you pay attention to. All right, moving over to the Big Ten with the only game that we're going to cover with in this conference today. It's not Michigan, it's not Ohio State, but we are going to go to Beaver Stadium and talk about Penn State. Still ranked number 14th in the country. I know you just don't like those Penn State fans, but they're still ranked 14th in the country with their only losses to Michigan and Ohio State. So trying to keep their season alive for a possible NY6 Bowl. I still think they have great potential. But they got to get through Maryland. And Maryland's a 6-3 football team. We've seen some really good things out of Maryland. They played very well against Michigan for a long time. They played better against Michigan than Penn State did. But, Steve, they're in Beaver Stadium. And as I've mentioned plenty of times on this show, I don't know if there's a harder place to play in maybe all of college football than Beaver Stadium. Penn State plays completely different when they play at home. They play very tough. And this is a matchup that is in their favor, 10.5 points in their favor, if you will, over under 57. I think Penn State can get this done, especially on the back of Clifford and Singleton. I like Maryland in this one. I think they can keep it up and play very well like they did against Michigan. But I think Penn State will get this one done. I think they cover as well with that minus 10.5.
You know, as I said earlier, I think weather potentially could be a factor. It's going to be very, very windy up in north central PA. And that's just a part of the state where storms just kind of pop up out of the blue. They don't last long, but they can be disruptive. But compared to what Maryland played in at Wisconsin last week, it's going to be seem like they're on a tropical island somewhere, I think, in a lot of ways. It's going to boil down to turnovers. And the Terps have done a terrific job forcing turnovers all season long. And probably that's made the Maryland's defense look a tad better on paper statistically because they've come up with some pretty big turnovers. And Lord knows the Nittany Lions know how to turn the ball over, especially late in games. I'm not as high on Clifford. I've sort of given up hope in him being a consistent factor in games, certainly against major opponents, not only just in the conference, but just in general.
That's a fair argument, to be honest.
Yeah, you know, I think it would behoove James Franklin to keep the ball on the ground. I mean, there's teams that have been successful against the rush with Maryland, including Wisconsin in horrible conditions last week. But I think Tagovailoa, he's the X factor here. If he can create scoring drives by utilizing like out routes and screens and short passes, I think the Terrapins will be able to keep it close. That's what I'd be betting on, truth be told. I don't think Penn State can cover the 10.5 point spread. And that's even with erasing all of the cloudiness as far as how I view Penn State in general. I mean, that's actually with clear vision. I think Maryland is going to be able to control the clock well enough. It's going to keep the score certainly under the over-under, which I believe is 59.5 the last time I saw.
Yep.
But for me, if Penn State has to go to the air later, then I could see Maryland pulling off an upset. But I'm with you. I mean, Penn State won't cover it, but I think Penn State wins the game at home.
If you think there's going to be some bad weather, just like you saw with Maryland and Wisconsin last week, Wisconsin took care of Maryland on the run game. I mean, they had 278 rushing yards against Maryland, and that was what really hurt the Terps from losing against Wisconsin. And that was an upset, if you will. If that happens in this matchup, and Nick Singleton and the rest of the Penn State running back committee, they're led by two great freshmen. If they can get going, they average almost 175 yards per game, and Maryland can't stop that run game, and they take the ball out of Clifford's hands, Penn State's going to have a really fun day. And I think that's where they find their chances to cover this spread and win this football game. If they can find a way to stop Singleton and the rest of the running game of Penn State, now I think we're talking a different football game.
Yeah, and I think that's easier said than done. I mean, basically, it's just that if Maryland does turn the ball over and jumps out ahead, Penn State's going to have no choice but to be more active in the air. And when that happens, I mean, again, Clifford is capable of having a big game, but I'm game planning against Penn State running the ball, and I'm almost daring Penn State to throw it.
There you go. All right, let's head over to the Big 12. We got two great games to talk about in our Saturday six-pack. for the Big 12. Let's start off with Kansas State versus Baylor. And I think this is an interesting matchup. On the Kansas State side, you had injuries to Adrian Martinez. You thought that they were going to have a hard time against the Pokes of Oklahoma State. Guess what? They win 48-0. Then the following week, they head in and play Texas. And you're thinking that could be a good game. Well, Texas wins by a touchdown. It was a very good game, but Kansas State didn't find a way to win that football game, finds a way to get Texas ranked again. And now we see Texas, which we'll talk about here in just a minute. Kansas State sitting at 6-3. I think they are a very difficult 6-3 team. On the other hand, Baylor, also 6-3, has started the season off pretty rough, if you will. I mean, this was a team that we thought was going to be a defending Big 12 champion, could really win it out. We thought they were getting a lot of disrespect at the beginning of the season, where people were thinking, who will win the Big 12? Will it be Texas? Will it be Oklahoma? They were saying, or will it be the field? They didn't even say the defending champion. And it makes a lot of sense now looking at it, but they have really resurrected their season, if you will, winning the last three against Kansas, Texas Tech, and Oklahoma. No walk in the park, no matter how low of a season teams like Oklahoma have been having. And they're back at 6-3. The Big 12 is wide open. Once again, at least one of the games heading into the Big 12 championship, we might see a TCU team walk in there after a win today and clinch their bid. But the other side of that championship game is wide open. And this is one of those games that has a lot of implications on who heads to that championship game. This is going to be a really good matchup in this one. It is in Baylor. It's in Waco, and Baylor's only a 2.5-point favorite. That's basically just saying, hey, you're the home team. We're going to give you a little bit of favorite. This is basically an even matchup, over under at 52.5. What's your thoughts about this one? Because I know you've paid attention to Baylor a lot this season.
Yeah, I have. And I've come to the conclusion that the Baylor Bears are the Barney Fife of the Big 12. I mean, it's bumbling, and they seem to be making all kind of like stupid mistakes and decisions. But at the end of the day, happy ending at the end, of the football game. Baylor has the second highest rated defense in the Big 12. Now, you can argue, well, that's not really saying very much because the Big 12 is more of an offensive, high-octane conference than many others. But, they have the weapons defensively to at least keep in check a pretty explosive Kansas State offense. I mean, they're going to pile up yards on the ground and through the air. So it's not like you can just focus on one aspect of the game or the other. Baylor's just been too inconsistent to the degree, and really more than they could afford to be when you're in a conference like the Big 12. We've said week after week after week, top to bottom, this is the best conference, in college football. Even the teams near the bottoms, like, the West Virginias, the Iowa States, they still are capable of putting up solid efforts against anybody, whether it be TCU, whether it be Baylor, whether it be Texas. Baylor's running game has been the determining factor as far as in the win column. Baylor is 5-0 when they rush for more than 170 yards. When they don't, they're 1-2. So Kansas State just simply needs to try to impose its will on the Baylor offense. They're not going to completely shut down the run game. They need to contain it to the best that they can, and then see if they can let their offense, lead the way. One thing that I know before I turn it back over to you, Christian, because I know I tend to babble. I tend to get into that senior mode and I babble a little bit, is that when I was doing research about this game, I read a bunch of previews saying that Baylor is trying purposely to be more aggressive, forcing turnovers. Okay. Now, Kansas State does a pretty good job, protecting the football and not making costly mistakes. But in a game of two 6-3 teams that have a legitimate chance to be face off against TCU, in the Big 12 championship game, even one turnover late in the game or at a crucial point in the first half even could make the difference. I am going to go with the over in this game. I think 53.5 is a tad low there, but I would stick to exotic bets as opposed to trying to bet the game either straight or even any other kind of lines. I mean, this is going to be not necessarily a bloodbath, but this is going to be a battle from kickoff to the closing whistle. And I'm going to go with Baylor. I think Baylor realizes that they had opportunities in their hands to control their destiny, and they kind of dropped it, like Barney Fife trying to pull his gun out of his holster. But I think they've got that motion down now. So I think Baylor has the weapons and has the game plan to win this football game.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think I'm with you on that, taking Baylor. Just what we've seen the last few weeks, they're on the rise. And obviously they had Kansas State had a great game against Texas last week. They kept it close. So I do think this is going to be a very close game once again. I wouldn't be surprised if this was exactly the same kind of game as we saw with Baylor in Oklahoma, where it was a field goal game at the end of it. So I could see Baylor win this one. 2.5 points might be just enough for Baylor. Like I said, it might just be a field goal win. So I'll take Baylor with the -2.5 on this one. And I agree with you on the over. I think this is going to be a shootout. Like, again, I could see a 38-35 finish, just like we saw in Oklahoma. This is going to be a really good matchup. The Big 12, just like you said, is so deep. This is the only conference left that technically every team still has a chance to make a bowl in week 11. Now, West Virginia has to win out. They're the only team that is 3-6. Everybody else has at least 4 wins. So if West Virginia wins out, they play Oklahoma this week too. So no easy task. Everybody still stays alive for a bowl game. That would be wild if we saw every single team. We already have half the conference already eligible for a bowl. If Oklahoma wins today, they are eligible to knock out West Virginia. But we have an opportunity. If West Virginia wins out, if we get 2 more wins from Texas Tech, 2 more wins from Iowa State, and then 1 more win somewhere by the Sooners, every single team in the Big 12 will be eligible for a bowl. That is absolutely wild.
It's mind-blowing, right? Exactly. And I mean, you can see why I think the Big 12 is so aggressive in trying to recruit new teams in and trying to secure more lucrative media deals in order to do that recruitment. Because I think the Big 12 realizes, okay, let everybody talk about the SEC and the Big 10 and the ACC. We're going to just, under the radar, build ourselves a conference that is good in all sports, not just football, but particularly in football and basketball, bottom to top, the premier conference. And then let's see everybody try to ignore us.
Yeah, absolutely wild. All right, let's head to what I think is the game of the week. And I think many also think the same as well. College Game Day is there. They tend to try to follow the game of the week, if you will. I think this one is the game of the week, regardless if College Game Day is there or not. TCU at Texas. TCU 9-0, heading for 10-0, looking for 10-0, if you will, against a Texas team who has a lot of love for the college football committee, if you will. I think some of it is worth the love, but I also think it's a little inflated, if you will. Heading into this game, Texas, the 6-3 team, is a 7-point favorite. It was 9 on Monday when we talked about this game initially. So it's gone down a little bit, but the undefeated Sonny Dykes team is a touchdown underdog heading into Austin. This is going to be 100,000 people strong in Austin, Texas. It's already wild at College Game Day, but this game's not even till 7:30 at night. They're going to be partying hard until this game starts. TCU 9-0 on this one. They are averaging over 500 yards per game of offense. This team has been so exciting to watch, and they just don't get the love they deserve. They finally get into the top 4 of the college football playoff rankings this season. They're sitting right at 4 behind 2 Big Ten teams and the University of Georgia. Max Duggan has been absolutely incredible. You're putting him in some names with like RG3 and Big 12 record books right now with some of the things he's done. And he has just looked absolutely amazing. And then you have a guy like Kendre Miller, who has really just taken off and done some great things. In the last 4 games, he's over 100 yards. He had 158 yards and a touchdown rushing against Texas Tech in their 34-24 win last week. I really like what TCU is doing. Again, we have talked about them for a very long time this season. And I believe that we have been one of those shows that have said more often than other shows, maybe some bigger shows than us, that you should not be sleeping on TCU. And I think that we have really strongly put our case here. I am a huge Quinn Ewers fan. I've talked about that ever since watching that first quarter of him play against Alabama. I think that injury really messed with his season a little bit. When you look at his stats, throwing 5 interceptions. When he came back, he had some issues in some of his games. I do think he's a great quarterback. I think we're going to see him do some really good things. I can see him being one of those guys that we talk about a decade from now, being a fantastic quarterback in college football history.
Yeah.
Like, I think that he has a potential to be that guy, not just his fantastic mullet. I mean, it's going to be some really good stuff from Quinn Ewers. But TCU, real fast, but TCU is one of those teams that you walk in and knowing that you're a 7-point underdog in Austin, Texas, and Sonny Dykes has that team just completely just on high octane. And now they finally know that they're in the college football playoff, at least thoughts right now. There's no way that I could pick against TCU. Not today. And honestly, I don't think ever this season.
I'm with you. I mean, and it is going to be Ewers. I think it's even beyond potential. Ewers is going to be the guy. This is not the season for it. It's a great training ground for him, a great classroom for him, but I don't think this is the year for him. And we've joked all season long about various games being the game of the year until next week.
Right.
And we even said it last week. This honestly has the potential to be the game of the year with an exclamation point, and every other game is going to pale in comparison. Even some of those great, games involving Alabama and Tennessee and LSU and some great finishes. This has all the workings for a college football fan's buffet. Yeah, it's going to feature the two, Texas gunslinger quarterbacks. Max Duggan is just criminally underrated.
At the beginning of the season, you got to remember he was the backup at the beginning of the season. He did not win the starting job, and the injury went down. Could you imagine if that injury never occurred? This TCU team would not be 9-0. There's no way. Max Duggan has taken this team to undefeated, and honestly has the chance to take them to 10-0 this week.
Absolutely, and you could almost call this game the Gary Patterson Bowl, because Patterson's the guy responsible for rebuilding, the TCU program, in the shadows of Texas and Texas A&M and Oklahoma, but certainly within the state of Texas. And he's the guy that brought Duggan in, and Quentin Johnson and Kendra Miller. The vast majority of players on this roster were recruited initially and signed in by Gary Patterson. Now he's on the other side of the ball. Now he's an assistant under Sarkisian in Texas. And the interesting thing about TCU that people forget, and I'm going to make this comparison, and before you start laughing and putting nasty comments up, just let me finish my thought here. I know that's always dangerous when I preface whatever I'm going to say.
When you lead like that.
Yeah. But TCU is the Notre Dame of the Southern and Southwestern universities. It's a large private institution. So it's not like a state university like Oklahoma or Texas. It has money, it has private donors that are very loyal, that aren't afraid to spend money and invest it in the program. But ultimately, it's always going to be the outsider. It's always going to be that large institution with relatively strong religious foundations, that have to compete against the big public universities. So to have TCU come so far as quickly as it has, it makes it extra special for them to be 9-0. But I think it's also a reason why they get disrespected, because it's just easier to go with the traditional powers in a conference like the Big 12. What will perhaps make a difference in this game that we haven't talked about yet is Bijan Robinson. Mm-hmm. I think that, behind him, they can kind of grind things out. But quite honestly, this is going to be a typical TCU football game. Kickoff to the final buzzer. They don't turn the ball over. They've only had 6 turnovers in their 9 games. Their offense does just enough every game to move the chains and be better than their opponents. They have the 4th best defense in the nation. So even with all the star power and Texas and game day, I mean, this game is worthy of game day, but most game days at Texas are there because all of the crew want to go out and party the night before in Austin, because it's one of the great cities in the country to have a great nightlife and great meals and great culture. So, but this is actually absolutely deserving of the game.
Yeah.
Of the game day crew there. And Texas is going to perhaps come up with some big plays, but TCU goes to 10-0. And this is the game where finally the playoff committee can't make excuses as to why other teams are ahead of them. Yeah. I think if they play the typical TCU game against Texas on game day, I think you could legitimately see TCU jump to the number 2 spot in the college playoff.
I'm with you on that one. I think that if they win this game, you have to make the argument that they're maybe not number 4. There may be at least a 2 or 3. They have to jump at least one of the Big Ten teams in my mind, knowing that they're going to have a loss by one of those Big Ten teams eventually because they play at the end of the season, Michigan and Ohio State. There is no room for error though with TCU. The committee has tried so hard for TCU to rule them out already. Mm-hmm. They were the last team that was undefeated in the rankings with the AP and the college football polls for the longest time. And I don't see that changing unless they make a statement win here. Now, last college game day in Austin was a fantastic football game. There was a 1-point loss or a 2-point loss, I believe, by Texas over Alabama. That was a fantastic game.
Yeah,
that was great. We are in, just like you said, could be the game of the week. Until next week, could be the game of the week in this one. I think Dugan is going to be a real big game changer in this one. Again, there is no room for error on the TCU side. If they lose, they are going to be out of the college football playoffs. That's just how this committee looks at the Big 12 this year. That's how they look at this TCU squad. If there's a 1-loss team, it's not going to be from the Big 12. If TCU loses this football game, it's just not going to happen. So TCU has a lot to lose in this matchup here in Austin. Again, a 7-point underdog in this one. I can see TCU win this one outright. I think
give me the points.
Right. Same here. Give me the points on this one. Even if you really think they can win it, play it on the money line, get your odds more in your favor. I just see TCU win this game. They have been ruled out so many times this season. They have been down 4 times in the second half and came back and won. They're 4-0, obviously, in the second half, having that 9-0 record. They find a way to get to 10-0 today and puts Texas to 6-4. That'd be a pretty interesting season on Steve Sarkisian moving forward. All right, but let's move over to the Pac-12. Before we get into the Washington-Oregon game, I got to talk about last night's game between USC and Colorado. At the end of the first quarter, the score was 3-2. Wild. Colorado had the score of 3-2. It was a baseball game. I didn't know Colorado and USC had baseball games. Maybe there's a new expansion. Maybe Manfred's doing some things. Whatever the case, that was absolutely wild. But when you look at the final score, USC absolutely ran away with it. I took Colorado with the plus 34 points, thinking that spread was going to happen. They didn't make it. And I was really hopeful when I saw the score at the end of the first quarter. I was really hopeful, and that just wasn't the case. USC is one of those teams that their record looks good, but they have really shown some scares throughout this season. If they find a way to the Pac-12 championship, I just don't know. Caleb Williams is one of those guys who has probably had his worst game last night and still looked pretty decent. Still had some pretty good stats. I just don't know what I think about USC. There's just so many question marks in my mind about this team, Steve.
Yeah, it's like going to the circus and watching the tightrope walkers. Of course they play up the drama and everything, and look at that.
Yeah,
that's what makes USC such an attractive bowl team, because you could have one of the greatest offensive performances ever come out, or they could come out just flat and make you wonder how is this game closer? How are they losing? It should never be 3-2 against Colorado.
That was wild. That was that was how the first quarter ended, but once the second quarter got going, if you would have went to bed after the first quarter thinking your bet was safe, like I did, and then you go into the second quarter, and then at halftime it's 26-3. You know that it's about to be over, and that's how it ended. It was a 55-17 final, and like I said, Caleb Williams probably had his worst game of the season last night. Still threw for 268, 3 touchdowns. He did throw a pick. I mean, that is something. The yards, the rushing yards was interesting on USC. Only had 185 yards. Travis Dye didn't really get going. Only had 26 yards, averaged less than 3 yards a carry. USC is going to have to figure it out if they find themselves in the Pac-12 championship, which really it will all decide on what happens next week, because if they play anything like they did against Colorado in the beginning of this game, heading into UCLA next week, which we will definitely be covering on next week's Saturday morning's special, it's just going to be a different game. They have 2 tough tasks to finish their season. They go and play at UCLA, and then they host Notre Dame. And we know about Notre Dame this year on their rise. So we'll see how that one goes. All right, let's dig into this game, the Pac-12 game of the week, if you will, and that is the University of Washington taking on Oregon, 7-2 versus 8-1. Again, this is one of those games that has big implications on who will make it to the Pac-12 championship. I love that they're picking the top 2 teams this year. It's not divisional based. This is exactly what you want to see from a conference like the Big 12. Bo Nix has been fantastic. He has found his way into the conversation as a Heisman finalist, and I believe that he deserves every right to be there after seeing what he's done the last few weeks. And Michael Penix has been fantastic as well. I mean, you have 2 great quarterbacks going at it. Michael Penix is one of the few quarterbacks who already has 3,000 yards on the season, 3,200 already, 23 touchdowns, 5 picks. And then Bo Nix at 2,500 yards, but he has really done some great things with this team. Oregon against University of Washington. Oregon is a 12-point favorite here in Eugene with the over-under at 72.5. And I believe that this is going to be a super high-scoring game. I wouldn't touch the over-under because that's just so high, but I wouldn't be surprised if it got that close or that even higher, Steve.
Well, I have to admit that if I was, and I'm not really going to touch this game because I admittedly have not paid as much attention to the Pac-12 as I have in years past. And I don't know why that is. I think I've just become so Big 12 centric, and I've been looking at FCS, so often that I just kind of like, oh, that's nice. I'll look at the scores or look at condensed thing. When you first pitched this game as being one of our Saturday morning specials, I have to admit, I mean, my first instinct was to kind of balk at it and say, I don't get it. But I think I was focused too much on Washington's 2 losses as opposed to their 7 wins. All right. So, and that's not really fair to because University of Washington, again, Penix, like as you mentioned, man, he's having just a fantastic year, and he's not even being talked about, as a Heisman. Maybe he's like an also receiving votes kind of guy, but I mean, that's just how wonderful Bo Nix is, and Caleb Williams has been at USC, and UCLA's big year. Oregon has played their way back into serious consideration for that 4th and final playoff spot. I don't think they'll raise any higher than 4. But if TCU would lose, which I don't think either of us see, I can see Oregon now being that 4th team, in consideration.
I'm with you on that. Yeah.
Washington has the best passing offense in the nation. Yeah. 370 yards per game. Their O-line has been fantastic. I mean, when I've been watching the condensed games, you just see it. I mean, you don't have any doubt that there's going to be a serious pass rush that's going to cause Penix to have to make bad throws or rush the ball. The problem is that the Huskies defense can't stop anyone. So even if they put up 40 or more points, there's a danger that the opponent, like at Oregon, is going to score 50 points. So you factor into that equation that Washington has been brutal on the road. UCLA, okay, good team, but that final score was not. It was very kind to UW. That game was not nearly as close as the final score was. And they lost to Arizona State. And they should have lost to Cal. So,
they should.
Yeah, so really, as my apologies, UW fans, for taking you too lightly or for granted. But against an Oregon team like this, I mean, I'm not only am I giving the 13.5 points, I might consider taking out a second mortgage and bet the over, only because that's how many points I think that Oregon is going to put up. And I can see Oregon putting up a 50 spot, where I see Washington also putting up a 40 spot. So, I mean, I really think that this over is
I think it's safe.
I think it's a tantalizing bet. I mean, that's why they call it gambling. There's no sure thing. But for me, I think this is going to be the best of Knicks and the best of Penix just going at it. And Oregon's going to just have more of a kick. It's like watching an Olympic mile, that last 100, 200 meters, everybody's, kind of trying to kick it into gear. I think Oregon just has a higher gear than UW is. But yeah, I mean, it would not surprise me to see 90 points put up between the two.
Washington is 1-2 on the road. As you said, they have not been great in away games. On their defensive side, they have shown some promise against the run, only averaging about 120 yards against the run. That is something that Oregon definitely relies on a lot more than some other teams in the Pac-12, even with Bo Nix at quarterback. Bucky Irving has been a fantastic running back for Oregon. He had 120 yards against Colorado last week. If he can get going, then I think this game gets completely out of reach, because Bo Nix is going to do his thing, whether Penix and Washington do it as well, because we can see it easily being a shootout. But if Bucky Irving and the running offense of Oregon get going, I think the Ducks run away with it with ease. If Washington can find a way to stop the run and at least limit it, maybe not stop it, limit it, I think this game stays close. I think the spread is in trouble, but I think Oregon still finds a way to win this football game. I think Oregon has been, since week 2, Oregon has been the best team in college football. I really think that, with the exception of that close game against Washington State, and they still played great, but Washington State really played, I mean, their ass off. They really did. I can't think of a team better since week 2, because I mean, the Georgia game, it was the first year coach, first year quarterback at a system. That was, if we saw Georgia versus Oregon now, that would be a different game. Not sure if it'd be a different result. Not sure, because Georgia is a hell of a team this year. Not sure if the result will be different, but it would definitely not be what we saw in week 1. I think since that game, Oregon, there hasn't been a better team than the Oregon Ducks. And I think that's really up for testing today against University of Washington tonight at 7:00 Eastern on Fox. We're going to see a shootout, just like you said, in the passing side.
Yeah, just real quickly, the one wild card into the rushing equation for Oregon is Bo Nix.
That's true too.
He has 10 rushing touchdowns over the last 4 or 5 weeks. So if he can take some pressure off of his backs, I think that opens up. Oregon's offensive line is good enough that it's going to create, maybe not inside the tackle kind of things, but maybe just kind of off the offside, or maybe some pitches. Bo Nix having that ability to run it himself, I think, will make it a little bit easier for the Ducks running backs to get themselves going here. But it's going to be a fun game. Admittedly, because I'm old, I'm going to have to watch it in a replay, because I'll fall asleep probably before it comes on. But it's something that it's the first thing I'm going to do in the morning is wake up and see what the results were and actually watch the game.
Well, let's talk about a game that's a little earlier in the slate that might help you out here. You don't have to worry about dusting your eyes off here. And I'm really excited to talk about that. We can talk about 2 ranked teams that are not in Power 5 conferences. And that is a fantastic way to end the Saturday 6-pack, if you will. UCF taking on Tulane at 3:30 Eastern time on ESPN2. Tulane's only a 1-point favorite. This game is up in the air. Number 22 UCF taking on number 17 Tulane. 7-2 for Central Florida. It's 8-1 for the Wave of Tulane. I really am excited to watch this game.
Yes,
I think Tulane has looked great all season long. I mean, they had a wild loss, but they have looked great all season long. Their defense looks good, only allowing just over 300 yards per game. Their offense over 420 yards per game. But UCF is one of those teams that if they get going, they can't be stopped. And we saw that with their wild win against Temple. And then, but we've also seen, I mean, that was like probably the biggest peak of the season, right? And then they fell off completely the next week with a pretty embarrassing loss to ECU, if you will. They've gained it back up. They had a nice win against Cincinnati, which was a game that we talked about because we just didn't really understand where Cincinnati was doing. We got that answer. And then they had a nice win against Memphis last week. I like this UCF team. I'm really a big fan of who they have under center with Plumlee. I think he is just a really good quarterback. But Tulane is one of those teams that you just can't count out whatsoever. They've looked good against Tulsa the last week. They look good against Memphis. Obviously, they beat ECU when UCF could not. This is a toss-up game for me. This is a game that I'm going to be completely glued to because I think this is a time where either the American starts beating up on each other and starts knocking themselves out of NY6 considerations with the entire conference, and that might bring up a certain team that we've been paying attention to, like UTSA, pop into that conversation, who's leading the Conference USA. Or we start seeing a team like Tulane, who has only had one loss, solidify themselves as an NY6 contender and find a way to finish 11-1. I think this is easily their toughest task for the rest of the season. Tulane, they have SMU and Cincinnati on the rest of the year. I mean, no joke. They still have a tough schedule, but I think UCF is going to be a very tough game. I'm going to lean towards Tulane to win this game, but I am not confident whatsoever in that pick. Definitely not playing it, but my eyes will be glued to this one, Steve.
I'm not going to play this game because I just want nothing to take away from the pure enjoyment I'm going to have watching this football game. I think it's going to be Mardi Gras in November for fans of the Green Wave. Like so many schools that we have kicked around, UTSA and Coastal Carolina, we've been screaming about Cincinnati, and I certainly looked foolish because I was touting Houston early in the year. All of that focus has been on the wrong teams, in the American Athletic Conference all year. It was on Houston early in the preseason and Cincinnati up until they got their whooping. Tulane doesn't beat itself with turnovers and penalties.
That's true.
It is very opportunistic with its offense because the defense provides good field position, provides turnovers to put the offense in a position where they can score. They don't have to go 88 yards or 80 yards, on a drive. Tulane, in a lot of ways, kind of reminds me of TCU in that they just do everything well.
I'm glad that you brought that up because I was literally about to say Tulane is a field goal loss away from Southern Miss, who was a weird loss, but they are a field goal loss away from being in the same conversation as TCU in the college football playoffs.
Yeah, and that Southern Miss game, again, I mean, you live in Virginia, I live in Pittsburgh, so we may not be as into some of the Southern state rivalries, but having lived in Biloxi in Southern Mississippi for a while, this is a big game. Tulane, Southern Mississippi, no matter what the records are, it's actually a pretty big game when they play. So I think there was a lot more of emotional strings involved with that game. UCF, like you said, they're going to put up the numbers, and they're a very good football game, but they do what Tulane does not, and that is turn the ball over. With Tulane only allowing 17 points per game, they probably will allow more than that to UCF. Yeah. But in their wins against offense-first opponents like Houston and like East Carolina, they've shut them down. Or they've at least, again, contained them, kept them, in the box. Bending, not breaking. And I think once you get to the 50-yard line, that's where the Green Wave defense gets a lot more serious. So I can't wait to watch this game. You and I have both been talking about these two teams. Tulane probably primarily more for me and UCF for you. But, this has implications not only for bowl games, but I think it has recruiting implications.
Oh, for sure.
For both programs. If Tulane can make the run and have a New Year's Six bowl, okay, now suddenly, they can compete better in state or in East Texas, in Mississippi, even in Florida, to help their program. And UCF has earned its wings, if you will. Kids, especially in Florida and in the Southeast, look at UCF as a legitimate destination point for themselves. And with UCF moving up, into our beloved Big 12, I think this has a lot more at stake than just the conference and just the bowl game. So those are the kind of dynamics that make watching college football games fun. So is this going to be Texas TCU? No. Is it Alabama Ole Miss? No, not as far as all the hype goes. But as far as watching two teams playing their hearts out, I can't wait for this game.
Yeah, if you're not worried about the hype, but you're just worried about a good football game, this could easily be the game of the week. This could easily be the game of the week. I'm leaning towards Tulane, but I have definitely paid more attention to UCF this year. I think they're one of those exciting football teams. This game could go either way. And I'm going to be glued to this one. Again, 3:30 Eastern time on this one. You'll be able to stay awake from this one, I hope. So,
I'm shooting for it. You never know. And when you're at my age, it's always that's nap time now. So I have to make sure I've set my alarm, maybe have a set backup alarm so I hear them both. So I'm up to watch the game.
That's good. That's all right. Get yourself a nice cup of coffee, even if it's in the midday. That's all right. All right. Let's head over to our Misfits of the Week. Always a great segment. Again, thank you so much once again for chiming in, listening to our Saturday morning special and all of the content we have over at Slasher U, bringing you new pieces of content over on our YouTube page daily with college football, college basketball, cross country, even in a whole bunch of college sports. We are just getting started with this project. Plenty more of college sports will be hitting the feeds. And we have new content, again, like I said, posted daily. So give us a like, a comment, or even subscribe. Join our 150 plus subscribers over on Slasher U. All right, my Misfit game of the week is Wisconsin versus Iowa. And I had to throw this game out there because Wisconsin should not be in the Misfits at all. I mean, what a weird season for this team, right? They're 5-4. Both these teams are 5-4. They start the season off, honestly, just it seems like a decade ago that Paul Chryst has already been fired. But this is a team who we thought was going to be pretty decent, and they just were embarrassed this season. And then they find a way to resurrect their season a little bit with a win against Purdue, which is big, a win against Maryland, which was big. And now they're on a 2-game winning streak. They head into Iowa City, which is never an easy thing to do against a team who is also on a 2-game winning streak, who is trying to resurrect their season. Win against Northwestern and an Ulster win against Purdue. It's crazy how we thought Purdue was going to be this really top edge team, and they've lost 2 straight. And that's just a shame for the Boilermakers. However, I put this one as my misfit game is because, one, the spread is even. I mean, there's no plus anywhere. It is legit even. 3:30 on Fox Sports 1. The winner is eligible for a bowl game. We talked about it with Paul Chryst once he was fired and they gave Jim Leonard the reins. If he can make it to a bowl game, maybe we'll see him as the future coach. Maybe they won't go for an external hire and they'll keep him. Well, here's his opportunity. And this is a tough one to do it. He's a defensive-minded coach, right? Well, he's going to have to find a way to win against arguably one of the toughest defenses in college football. I think this is a very poetic game. That's why I picked it, to see if he can do that against one of the toughest teams. And Iowa is trying to fight a way to stay alive as well. I mean, you have a coach with Iowa who is arguably on the hot seat, who has been there for a really long time, resurrected their defense, but their offense is so atrocious. I mean, we've talked about it this season. There has been points in time where ESPN stats have stated that they would have been better off in their game by punting rather than playing offense. That's how bad this offense has been. Their defense has kept them alive. If you can tell me that a one-dimensional team like Iowa can find a way into a bowl game, anything is possible. I feel like this is the true definition of a misfit in this one. I'm going to lean towards Wisconsin because I think Jim Leonard can get it done. And I would just love to talk about that storyline to see if he finds a way to actually get that head coaching job at Wisconsin once the season's all said and done. And he gets rid of that interim tag.
Yeah, he's completely won me over. I mean, I think when the Chryst firing happened, I was very much like, you know what? No, I think they're going to go outside. I think they want to make more of a splash. I think they're sort of falling behind in the Big Ten. it just, I mean, Ohio State, Michigan are such, behemoths in that conference, certainly Penn State. But Wisconsin's kind of slowly regressed, and I think that's what cost Paul Chryst the job. But I think Leonard, I don't see how you can't,
Right,
unless they completely fall apart, the rest of the way. I don't see how you can't remove that interim tab there. Do we see history today? Do we see a time where Wisconsin is the second game that I was involved with where there's no touchdown scored?
no, I don't see that one. I think that there is a prime opportunity that could happen, but I think Wisconsin has a way better scoring offense than we've seen in the past with some of those other games. I mean, Wisconsin's averaging 30 points per game offensively, so I think they find a way to score. But I do think you're right. I think this is the start. If Wisconsin can win this game, I mean, we could be talking about them being a potential 8-4 team. And they could win out. If they play in Iowa, then they go to Nebraska, who's interestingly been decent since the firing as well. And then they end the season home against Minnesota, who Minnesota's kind of fell off. We talked about them for a while at the beginning of the season, but they fell off. So
big disappointment. Yeah,
there's a prime spot for them to finish 8-4, even a 7-5 finish with this team, with this Jim Leonhard team after a firing and after people transferring out. I think that they love the fact that he probably is good in the recruiting circle. He's been a Wisconsin guy. He knows what it takes to recruit in that area. I think he sticks around with a 7-5 or 8-4 record, but it all starts today in Iowa City. All right, let's get to your misfit game here. You're heading to the Ivy League with the FCS pick of the week, Steve.
I am, and then my first choice was going to be Oklahoma, West Virginia. Leading up to that, I've been a little bit under the weather, so I'm not going to the game, but I have a ticket for the game, and I was really looking forward to the Oklahoma, West Virginia game because again, West Virginia needs to win to stay alive for a bowl. Oklahoma, you never know which team is going to show up, but I went with tradition instead. The Ivy League doesn't send its teams to the FCS playoffs because they run deep into December and that interferes with finals. Now, it's a very refreshing approach, but it's unfortunate. Just like with the SWAC and the MEAC, the Celebration Bowl is the big game for the winners of those two conferences. For the Ivy League, winning the Ivy League title, especially an outright title, it's big. It's their Super Bowl. It's their national title, if you will. I mean, on a much reduced scale, but still, for the schools in the Ivy League, it's that important. Princeton controls its destiny. It's 5-0 in the Ivy. It can, just by winning out the rest of the year. And they're going to knock off one of their rivals potentially next week with Penn, but they control their chance to win an outright title. If they win today and Penn loses, they guarantee at least a share of the Ivy League title. And now you're looking at Yale, who is also 4-1 in the Ivy with Penn. I don't think a lot of people thought in September that they had the team that was going to be able to get themselves to even getting a share of the Ivy League title. But again, they've played their way. Like we talked about Baylor, playing their way into consideration for things. Yale has done that. They've had a lot of momentum over the last couple of weeks. Fittingly enough, for Yale, it goes against their two fiercest rivals in the Ivy League, Princeton, and then, of course, Harvard. And don't think that Harvard's not drooling at the possibility that if Yale wins today, that they would have a chance to knock Yale out of a chance of having a share of the Ivy League title.
Yeah.
Yale's put up 425 yards a game, and they scored a shade under 33 points a game. Tony Reno's done a really nice job with this team, not only recruiting and getting the type of players that Ivy League programs need to go after, but he's really made some adjustments on the fly. So they've really it's a great story. I mean, this is a big game for Yale. The wild card for Princeton. Okay, again, I think their defense is the best defense in the Ivy. I don't know that statistically that's the case, but I mean, I watch them every week.
Yeah.
If not live, I watch the replay in its entirety. I don't do the condensed. They're the best defense, certainly the most opportunistic defense in the Ivy. But they've had AJ Barber emerge over the last 2 weeks. And that's the son of Tiki Barber. Yes. So you know the name. He was primarily, returning kicks and punts. He had some problems with fumbles early in the year, but he really kind of stepped it up. He made some other, he even played defensively on the special teams part, but he's getting a chance to see regular targets. And he's probably their biggest big play threat now on the roster. They've got several really talented receivers. But if Barber continues to be that threat, even if they're not targeting him all the time, Yale's going to have to shift way too many of its focus on Barber. That's going to open up avenues and certainly open up the running game for Princeton. For me, it's going to come down to which team forces turnovers more, and I think Princeton is more adept at that than Yale is. I think this is just Princeton's year. That's not a knock against Yale. Yale's had a really strong October, and then leading into the month of November. Yeah. The Harvard-Yale game next week, Harvard-Yale, Princeton-Penn, potentially, they could be two games that dominate our Five for Friday, or even sneak into our Saturday show, because it's the Ancient Eight, okay, and it is tradition. Mm-hmm. There's something special, like we were talking about Tulane, UCF. There's something special about watching that game. Sometimes watching fierce rivalries, no matter what the score is, it's a more enjoyable experience for the fan watching the game than it is necessarily for the TV ratings or for the stat sheets. So I'm going to go with Princeton in this game. I don't know how you're leaning here, but I think this is Princeton's year.
Yeah, the only thing that I'm concerned about with Princeton, their defense has been great, but if you look on the Yale side, in the last two games, Yale has scored 110 points, 69 of them coming last week. Now, I know it was against Brown, but then they also scored 41 against Columbia. Now they're towards the bottom of the Ivy. Sure, fine, but 110 points, no matter who you're playing, that's a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, I think it's 436 yards, per game. And again, in the FCS, sometimes you're playing teams that are not at the top of any of the conference, let alone your conference. Mm-hmm. But every team has to do the same thing as well. But yeah, I mean, Yale, boy, if Yale wins that game, potentially you could have a three. No, you couldn't, because Penn would be playing Princeton, but you would be going into that last weekend of the season and have three teams legitimately with a shot at the Ivy League title.
Gotta love it. And that's exactly where you want at the end of the season. You don't want things just put in a bow and tied up already and shipped off. You want it to go down to the wire, especially when you don't have a bowl game. So next week is the Super Bowl for the Ivy, if you will. That's going to wrap it up here for Slasher U for our Saturday morning special show. Thank you so much for joining us once again. We'll be back here with another Saturday morning special. We'll be here with Saturday morning specials live all throughout 2022. I believe our last Saturday morning special show will be December 31st. So we're going all the way through the end of the year on this one. If you're looking for more content, if you want some more for your individual team, head on over to Slasher U on YouTube and check out our immense feed. We're up over 200 videos of teams, previews, recaps, analysis, opinionated videos, you name it, we got it over at Slasher U. And if you're not seeing your team, hit us up in the comments. Yes. Let us know that we're missing your team, because we want to talk and we want to do this for you guys, Steve.
Absolutely. I mean, again, we look at views, and that's what turns us on to certain programs. I mean, we've been, UTSA Central, all season, but it's because we noticed the great response we got on social media and on our YouTube channel. And we don't know, okay, we try to be as fair and balanced because we're fans. We're doing it from a fan's perspective. We'll throw stats out, and that's because, I mean, people like to hear stats, but really we're fans. We're talking about, as two fans, these are the games we're really looking at. We can't cover every single game. And there might be conferences or teams that we're overlooking, especially as we phase and put more emphasis on our college basketball as college football winds itself down going into the bowl season. Tell us who you want us to talk about, because we want to talk about games that you care about, not just games that we care about.
No team is too big or too small.
Right.
Scores are not the only thing that matter here at Slasher U. It's for the love of the game. We'll see you back here next time. Take care.